Hey y'all, so recently I managed to pull Mr. Negative from the new 6-star featured, and I was really happy about that because he was one of my top asks. I've been planning out a weird Mr. Negative playstyle since he came out, and I've really wanted to explore the character further and figure out where he works best and how to use him because I see a lot of potential in the champion. While I have seen content of players like MP Blaze using him in high tier war, I haven't seen all that many extensive guides on his kit and how to use them. So I really wanted to make this video, and it's taken me a while, but I really hope that you'll find the end product was worth the wait. I hope you enjoy it. Before I begin, I want to preface that the intention of this video isn't to prove that Mr. Negative is the best champion in the game. Instead, it's to prove that he's a lot more versatile in his usage than a lot of us initially thought. A friend of mine on the Vega Discord server, DLL, said that when you read through Mr. Negative's kit, he's very obviously a powerful champion, and I wholeheartedly agree. But I also think, when reading through his kit, where will I be able to use Mr. Negative? How versatile really is this champion? And that's the question that I'm setting out to prove with this video. I'm setting out to prove whether he's like Symbiote Supreme, where he works really well for a few fights, but other than that, he's really not that good, or if he's like Human Torch, where he works really well for a select grouping of fights, but still works pretty damn well in a lot of others as well. And throughout this video, I think I managed to prove that he's more of a Human Torch. Now, when going through Mr. Negative's base stats as a 6-star rank 2, you may think that he leaves a lot to be desired, and I can understand that to be fair. His basic health is about 31,000, but on the higher side, some more like 32,000. His attack is just over 2,600. His crit rate is just over 900, which is equivalent to 30% of the time. His crit damage rating is 738, which is equivalent to roughly 180%. His armor is 431, which is equivalent to about 17%. And his block proficiency is a fairly measly 2,600, which is equivalent to roughly 56%. Now, honestly, if his base stats were much higher in combination with the abilities he activates in his kit, I think Mr. Negative would be pretty overpowered. So in many ways, like Mojo needs to have a really low block efficiency in order for him to be balanced, Mr. Negative has to have pretty low base stats in order for him to be balanced. The two sections on screen right now are probably some of the most important in all of Mr. Negative's abilities. First, we have his always active abilities. Mr. Negative is immune to all Nullify, Stagger, and Fate Seal effects. Now, this is really good, because it means he's immune to all of these effects, and that includes those from nodes like Buffet and Power Stack, which is really good. These nodes would normally make it harder for you to play the game by taking away your buffs, and then help the defender by giving them beneficial effects such as regen and power gain. Mr. Negative doesn't care. He completely shuts these off. This also makes Mr. Negative really good for fights where your buffs would be in danger, such as the two men, Mangog and Man-Thing, Symbiote Supreme, and the newly buffed Ebony Maw. The next line, the potency of the opponent's degeneration effects are reduced by 40% for each unique debuff they suffer. Now, to be clear, one thing to note here is that the debuffs have to be active on the opponent prior to when they activate their degeneration effects on you. So if you have no debuffs on the opponent and they activate a degen on you, and then you apply 3 debuffs to the opponent when the degeneration is already on you, you're not going to be taking any reduced damage. You'll be taking the full 100%. Now, that basically just means that you have to have the debuffs on the opponent before they activate the degeneration effect on you. Now, some masteries that can help make this easier include Resonate, which allows you to have a weakness on the opponent for a good portion of the fight, because the way that mastery works is whenever you hit the opponent, you have a good chance of applying a weakness debuff onto them. So right out the gate, you'll already have a 40% reduction to degeneration effects, at the minimum. If you include parry in that, that's another 40%. You have 80% off degen effects. Now, this makes him really good for certain fights where degeneration can be fairly troublesome, such as Dormammu, Ebony Maw, and Mojo. Now, this ability also makes Mr. Negative really good for nodes that apply degeneration effects, but remember to make sure that the node applies a degen effect and not direct damage, because more and more now, we're seeing Kabam change a lot of nodes that used to apply degens into applying direct damage, which Mr. Negative is not immune to. He cannot counter direct damage, only degeneration effects. It's also worth mentioning that Mr. Negative's awakened ability synergizes really well with his always active abilities. The first one, Mr. Negative is immune to all Nullify, Stagger, and Fate Seal effects, works really well with the first part of Mr. Negative's awakened ability, which is whenever a Nullify, Stagger, or Fate Seal effect is prevented by Mr. Negative's immunity, deal a burst of 290 to 1,323 physical damage, depending on the SIG level. Now, this isn't at all needed, since it doesn't add anything extra mechanically to Mr. Negative, but it does mean that when you're going to be taking a lot of nullify effects that just aren't going to work because of your immunity, you're also going to be inflicting a nice chunk of damage on the opponent, which is nice since Mr. Negative's main damage source is his L2, and other than that, he can feel a little bit weaker from time to time. The second part of Mr. Negative's always active abilities, the potency of the opponent's degen effects are reduced by 40% for each unique debuff they suffer, connects really well with the second part of Mr. Negative's awakened ability as well. While suffering from degeneration, regenerate 524 to 794 health per second depending on your SIG level. Now, this is really good because it means that even if you only have 1 or 2 debuffs active on the opponent, or even no debuffs active on the opponent, unless the degen effect active on you is a really strong one, a lot of the time your regeneration is going to be outpacing that degeneration. And if you have all 3 debuffs on the opponent, it just means that you're going to be getting completely free regen, which is really nice for Mr. Negative's sustainability. This next ability is quite intertwined with his heavy attack abilities. When evading, Mr. Negative counterattacks with a hit dealing a burst of 2,250 physical damage as a rank 2 6-star, and granting the opponent power equal to a medium attack. Now, it says that Mr. Negative counterattacks with a hit, and that means that this ability counts as an intercept for nodes like Foresight and Ebb and Flow intercepts, which gives you a really easy way to gain the bonuses from these nodes without having to risk going for an intercept. You can just back up, hold your heavy attack, and wait for the opponent to come at you. But make sure that the opponent is playing fairly aggressively and isn't just going to turtle up, because Mr. Negative's heavy attack has a limited charge duration, and if it takes too long and the opponent does not attack in, he's just going to drop the heavy attack and you're likely going to get hit into afterwards. Now, this evade while charging heavy mechanic is the exact reason why a lot of people made the comparison between Mr. Negative and Quake when he first came out. The only thing stopping Mr. Negative's heavy attack from being that broken in terms of how good its evade mechanic is 1, Mr. Negative requires 1 light energy in order to evade, and 2, the heavy attack counterattack does give the opponent power equal to a medium attack. Now, we'll explore what the light energy does and how you gain light energy soon, but it's also worth mentioning that if you do land the heavy attack instead of just using it as an evade counter, you will gain a Fury buff, increasing your attack by 397.05 for 10 seconds as a rank 2 6-star. Now, that may not sound like much, but 397.05 is actually 15% of Mr. Negative's base attack as a 6-star rank 2 of 2,647. So every time you get one of these Furies from actually executing a heavy attack, you're going to be getting an extra 15% attack, meaning for each Fury you stack before activating your special 2, your degenerations are going to be doing 15% more damage. So in the fights where you're able to do this, and there aren't that many other nodes going on, it might be wise to try to chain a few heavies in the corner before activating your special too, so you can increase the potency of your degenerations by 30, 45, even 60%. The next part of his kit is Mr. Negative's light and dark energy. Mr. Negative can gain these counters called light energy passives, and he can gain up to 20 of them. Whenever either champion performs a well-timed block, gain +2 light energy. This just means whenever you parry, you're going to get 2 light energy. The part about either champion performing a well-timed block is just meant for him on defense, because it means that, let's say you're fighting a Mr. Negative and you parry him, he's going to gain 2 light energy, so he can go through his defensive abilities and use them. The next part, dashing back, removes all buffs on Mr. Negative, granting +1 light energy per buff removed, makes him really good for nodes like Icarus, because not only is he going to be able to shut off that degeneration you get if you have too many Furies because of his, not just his always active abilities, but also his awakened ability, but if you don't have enough debuffs active on the opponent, you can just dash back and purify those Furies before you even trigger the degen. And so this just means that you're going to have a lot of light energy and a lot of attack throughout that entire fight. Not to mention the regen you can have if you stack up a few debuffs on the opponent and then activate the Icarus degen and just regen from it because of your awakened ability. The next part of this, light energy lasts indefinitely until reaching 10 stacks, after which all stacks will expire over 6 seconds. 6 seconds is a really tight window, so ideally you're going to want to avoid getting over 9 stacks of light energy unless you have a way to turn all of that into dark energy really quickly. The ways you can turn that into dark energy are either by using that evade counter we talked about earlier, where you can just hold your heavy and Mr. Negative will basically intercept the opponent. That will convert all of your light energy to dark energy. But it's also worth noting that Mr. Negative's dark energy only stacks up to 9, and you shouldn't do this when the opponent has a special attack, or else they could use it and you're just going to get hit in the face. Alternatively, you can use your L1 to convert all of your light energy to dark energy and also gain a bunch of really cool other benefits by doing so, but that may not always be an option if you need to work straight up to your L2 to end the fight quickly, or let's say you're already past your L2 and so you're not able to activate your L1. Just as darkness comes with light, so does dark energy come with light energy. Now, dark energy is the same as light energy in the sense that it's a passive counter that can stack up to 20, but that's pretty much where the similarities end. If Mr. Negative performs an evade or is knocked down, all light energy is converted into dark energy. Now, the knocked down part is for defense, so that he can convert the light energy he gains on defense into dark energy and inflict that reverse controls debuff on you. But on offense, that evade mechanic is what I was talking about earlier, with that being your main way that you're going to be converting light energy into dark energy. Dark energy lasts indefinitely until reaching 10 stacks, after which all stacks will expire over 16 seconds. Now, it's the same as light energy in the sense that you can get 9 stacks and it'll last indefinitely, but any more than that and it'll start to expire, except that with dark energy, you also gain an extra 10 seconds before it all goes away. And so this means when you have an excess of light energy, it may be wise to convert that into dark energy, since you're going to have a lot longer to figure out how you want to use that dark energy than you would if you just kept it as light energy. While suffering from disorient, all dark energy is removed and additional dark energy cannot be gained. Now, this is good for you if you're fighting Mr. Negative, because it means you can make it easier to play against him and you won't have to worry about his reverse controls. But when you're playing Mr. Negative, this can be a little bit of a pain to deal with, and so you want to be aware of the fact that if you get disoriented, you're not going to be able to do a lot of things, and so you got to be a little bit careful in those fights where you can be disoriented. Just got to play around it. He'll still be alright. You just need to be careful not to get that disorient on you. And if you do manage to get that disorient on you, wait it out. There's no harm in waiting it out. While not all of his abilities are shut down by the fact that he cannot gain dark energy, the fact that Disorient reduces your ability accuracy makes it risky to go for a lot of his plays, like using that evade or even using the perfect block. This next part can be really important for how you want to set yourself up for your L2 to deal a lot of damage. Each time dark energy is gained, inflict a delirium debuff, lasting a flat 0.8 seconds per light energy converted. A delirious opponent suffers minus 60% defensive combat power rate and has their dash and dodge controls reversed. Now when you're fighting against Mr. Negative, having your dash and dodge controls reversed can be a bit of a pain, but when you're playing him, that'll do nothing. The real important part of the delirium ability when you're playing Mr. Negative is the fact that it reduces the opponent's defensive combat power rate by 60%. This means that any power that the opponent would gain from either you hitting them or them hitting you is reduced by 60%. So what you'll want to do here is you'll want to wait until you have at least 9 light energy, which is what, a 7.2 second delirium debuff, or it'll last even longer if you're converting more light energy. You want to wait until you can get your opponent near their wall, and then you want to convert all of your light energy to dark energy, because this will allow you to just heavy chain the opponent in the corner, and they're not going to be gaining as much power, meaning you can get a lot more heavies off before they get to a bar of power. Now by doing this, you can get a bunch of Furies that you can then launch into your SP2 for some really big damage by letting the first hit of your heavy hit the opponent to gain 1 extra Fury, and then using your special 2. This Delirium ability can also be really helpful if the opponent is gaining a lot of power through your hits, such as with the Energized node, where the opponent will gain 200% defensive combat power rate. Now what this means is they're going to be gaining a lot less power, and the negative 60% defensive combat power rate should get them close to what they would regularly get in terms of power, and that'll help you a lot. Not just that, but in situations where the opponent has a really good passive power gain, say Hyperion, the Delirium will at least mean you don't have to worry about how much power they're gaining from your hits, and you only have to worry about their power gain effects rather than their defensive combat power gain from you hitting them. Funnily enough, Mr. Negative's light and dark energy counters also play into his SIG ability. For each light energy Mr. Negative has active on himself, he gains 31.87 to 182.62 energy resistance, and for each dark energy he has on himself, he deals 48.88 to 66.18 physical damage every second while the opponent is suffering from a non-damaging debuff. Though, this only scales with base attack, meaning that whereas a special 2 could have its degen damage increased if you had Furies from the heavy, if you had an attack boost active, or if you were playing on a node that increased your damage, this won't have its damage increase. The damage it does is purely based on Mr. Negative's base attack. Now, while neither of these points seem that significant right off the bat, when you consider that you can quite easily have 9 of each type of energy active, since they only expire if you have 10 or more, you can get quite a lot of benefit from both of these points at SIG 200. For example, a SIG 200 Mr. Negative with 9 light energy active on himself will gain 1,643.58 energy resistance, and a SIG 200 Mr. Negative with 9 dark energy on himself will deal 595.62 damage to the opponent per second, assuming you have a debuff active on them, that is. So, both of these abilities are quite helpful, because the energy resistance can help you kind of tank energy damage that you may get through Cold Snap or Incinerate debuffs, and the increased damage can help supplement for the cases where you're not able to that easily use your special 2, which is Negative's main damage source. The SIG ability isn't necessary, and these points especially are more minor than those like Mr. Negative being able to regenerate when he has degens on himself, but they're still nice to have, and they do make him a better character. Next up, we have Mr. Negative's special attacks. All of them do something really helpful in their own right, with the L2 being the main focus for damage. Now, the special 1 is still really powerful in the sense that on activation, you gain a bulwark passive for 30 seconds, increasing block efficiency by 700 for each light energy. Then, convert all light energy into dark energy. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier when I said that you could use the L1 to convert your light energy to dark energy and get some really good extra benefits. And that bulwark passive is insane. Assuming you convert 9 light energy to dark energy, which is the ideal amount to convert. This isn't stretching you at all, saying like, oh, you convert 15 light energy. No, this is just 9. With just 9 light energy converted, you gain an extra 6,300 block efficiency from that bulwark passive, which effectively makes your block efficiency around 8,973, which, if I'm correct, is the highest block efficiency in the game. Now, the other thing the special 1 does, which is really helpful, is the final hit inflicts an exhaustion debuff, which lowers the opponent's critical damage rating by 225 for 20 seconds. Now, the fact that it lowers the opponent's crit damage rating doesn't really matter that much, because if you're playing Mr. Negative right, you shouldn't be getting hit in the first place. But what this does do is it gives you a throwaway debuff that you have on the opponent for an extended duration of time, being 20 seconds, which means you're going to be reducing the opponent's degen effects by 40% already. And that means if you can combine that with that Resonate Mastery I was talking earlier, and then maybe a parry, you have 3 debuffs right there. And then you'll be taking no damage from degenerations. So this is a really powerful special attack to use if you want to gain a lot of sustainability, because that block efficiency you gain from the bulwark passive means that you're going to be able to parry most hits and take 0 damage. And that exhaustion debuff will mean you're just going to shut down degeneration effects even more easily. Mr. Negative's L2. Everybody knows how much damage Mr. Negative's L2 does, but the power of the utility that comes with it really can't be understated. The first hit inflicts a Petrify debuff, reducing the opponent's regeneration and ability power rate by 80% for 20 seconds. The second hit inflicts another Petrify if 10 or more dark energy are active. This means if you use your special 2 with at least 10 dark energy, you're going to have 2 Petrifies active on the opponent, each reducing their ability power rate and regeneration by 80% for 20 seconds. So in total, you're going to be reducing the opponent's ability power rate and regeneration by 160%. So you're actually going to be reversing it, and to a pretty potent degree as well. Not just that, but these debuffs do count for your ability that allows you to reduce the potency of incoming degeneration effects by 40% per debuff. So right there, you have a free 40% already from the Petrify for 20 seconds. Not just that, but since you're going to be using that strategy of utilizing your Delirium debuff to chain a few Furies before launching your L2, you should be completely shutting down the opponent's power gain, not just from their defensive combat power rate, but also from their ability power rates via the special 2. This means that even though the Delirium isn't going to completely cancel out the power you give the opponent by hitting them, if the opponent has any sort of passive power gain effect, even like Sorcerer Supreme's power gain over time, you're going to be reversing the power, because 160% reduction to ability power rate and 60% reduction to combat power rate, odds are the opponent's going to be gaining very little power, if any at all. As nice as those Petrify debuffs are utility-wise, nothing beats some good old-fashioned damage. The third hit inflicts a degeneration debuff, dealing up to 3,573.45 direct damage over 10 seconds, which is roughly 130% of Mr. Negative's base attack of 2,647. The final hit consumes all remaining dark energy, inflicting 1 additional degeneration for each dark energy consumed. Now, one really important thing to mention is that the damage that each degeneration effect deals doesn't just scale with base attack, it scales with modified attack, meaning that the extra attack you gain from Mr. Negative's heavy furies, or from boosts, from nodes, all of that is factored into how much damage those degen debuffs deal. So try to maximize your attack as much as possible. One really good node for this, as you may have guessed, is Power Shield, because the 400% increase to special damage applies to those degen effects as well, meaning that when you get a good special 2 off with a decent number of dark energy on a Power Shield node, you're going to be absolutely melting the defender. And that's not even to mention the extra utility you gain from another debuff being on the opponent. Since degeneration is a debuff, it counts towards Mr. Negative's always active ability, which means you're going to be reducing the damage you take from the opponent's degeneration effects by a further 40%. So, all in all, that special 2 isn't just going to give you a Petrify that reduces the incoming damage you take from degen by 40%, but also a degen effect on the opponent that reduces the amount of damage you take from their degens by another 40%. So the debuffs you get from the special 2 alone are going to reduce the damage you take from degen effects by 80%. So any other debuff, like the stun debuff from a parry, or the weakness debuff from the Resonate Mastery, are going to propel you to reducing the damage you take from incoming degen effects by 120%. Though I will say, keep in mind, the degeneration debuffs that you inflict from the special 2 only last 10 seconds, whereas the Petrify lasts 20 seconds. That means that you're only going to get a 10-second window where any degens you receive are going to deal no damage. So you might want to have some other debuff sources if you need to have that resistance to degen up for majority of the fight, like the Resonate Mastery, like a parry, and like the exhaustion from his special 1. Now, the L3 is a little bit weird in that you won't want to use it all the time, but when it's helpful, it'll be really beneficial for making sure Mr. Negative keeps his health bar topped up. So it inflicts a delirium debuff for 20 seconds, and all light energy is consumed, each regenerating Mr. Negative for 413.21 health. In addition, all dark energy is consumed, each dealing a burst of 2,249.95 direct damage to the opponent. Now, you'll likely see right off the bat that the damage you get from consuming dark energy with the L3 isn't nearly as much as consuming dark energy with the L2, but in my eyes that's kind of made up for by the fact that you get a really long-lasting delirium buff and some really nice regeneration. Keep in mind, delirium debuffs reduce the opponent's defensive combat power rate by 60%, and in this case that's 60% for 20 seconds, meaning that for 20 seconds the opponent isn't going to be gaining much power at all. Not to mention, it's a debuff, so it counts for Mr. Negative's always active ability that reduces the potency of incoming degen effects by 40%. So you effectively have a passive 40% resistance to degen effects for 20 seconds. As for the regeneration, it regenerates for you for 413.21 health per light energy. So, assuming you consume 9 light energy, which isn't that hard to do, since 9 is below the threshold where the light energy expires after 6 seconds, you can keep it for as long as you want. So converting 9 light energy will net you about 3,700 regen at a 6-star rank 2 level, which out of his health of 31,785 is about a 12% regen, which won't be useful in all fights since the L3 does reduce damage and will make it take longer for you to end the fight, but In a situation where you intend to use Mr. Negative for multiple fights on one path throughout the entire quest, using this L3 to regenerate and keep your health bar topped up may be a really good idea. Now onto Mr. Negative's synergies. A being darker than I, with Dormammu in the hood. For Dormammu, gaining dark energy has a 10% chance to trigger a fury buff, granting 20% attack rating for 9 seconds. Now, this is a pretty helpful synergy for Dormammu since his main issue is he doesn't have that much damage. But I don't see it being potent enough that it'll be the thing that convinces people to rank up Dormammu or to take him on your team. For the hood, heavy attacks place an energy vulnerability debuff on the opponent, reducing energy resistance by 700 for 8 seconds. Now this is actually a pretty darn good synergy, especially if Hood's buff that got reversed ends up coming back, since in that buff, his major way of dealing damage was by detonating all of those charges. And if I'm correct, that dealt energy damage, so reducing the energy resistance of your opponent could really increase the damage that detonation does. So Mr. Negative, when inflicting Delirium, there is a 50% chance to also inflict an Enervate debuff for 2 seconds, preventing the opponent from gaining power when struck. So in most fights, I don't see this synergy being that helpful, purely because you're going to be converting large amounts of light to dark energy, which means that you're only going to be getting 2 seconds of Enervate every once in a while, which isn't going to help your rotation very much. But in fights where you're going to be really frequently converting and using a more unorthodox Mr. Negative playstyle, like on a Foresight node, I can see the synergy being really helpful, because you're going to be really frequently using that heavy attack and thus applying a Delirium, so you're going to have that Enervate debuff that lasts for 2 seconds. Even though it's a short duration, you're going to have that up for a pretty large portion of the fight. The next synergy is Shadowland. If any of you know what the most recent World of Warcraft expansion is, you'll appreciate that. So Shang-Chi, dodging an attack with perfect timing, inflicts a falter passive, causing 100% of the opponent's attacks to miss for 2 seconds. Contact attacks bypass this falter and remove the effect. Now, I can see this being helpful for annoying non-contact attacks that you can't parry, say Iron Man Infinity War's first Repulsor Blast, but I don't see it being that helpful for Shang-Chi, since it doesn't work with contact attacks. I may be wrong here, but that is my initial impression for Shang-Chi. For Mr. Negative, degeneration debuffs triggered in Special Attack 2 have a 10% chance to inflict an additional copy of themselves. So this is basically just extra damage. It's a chance at getting a few more degens from your L2, and thus beefing up your damage by a little bit. And because of that, I don't think it's necessary by any means. I think it's nice to have, and I'm sure that someone somewhere will eventually get an L2 where every single one of those degenerations duplicates themselves. But I don't see that happening very often at all. And most of the time, I reckon you'll probably get anywhere from 1 to 3 degens, which isn't going to make that much of a difference in Mr. Negative's damage. Mr. Negative's next synergy is Healing Touch, with Venom and a mystery character. Now I have my theories on this mystery character being anti-Venom, and we'll end up seeing him in the same month as we get Null, but that's irrelevant for this video. For Venom, whenever a genetic memory buff is gained, Venom has a 20% chance to trigger a regeneration buff, healing 10% of missing health over 9 seconds. Now, I can see this synergy being really powerful, because Venom gains his genetic memory buffs very often, and so having a 20% chance to get a pretty hefty regeneration whenever he gains that buff is incredibly powerful. For Mr. Negative, once per fight when reaching 10 stacks of light energy, gain an indefinite regen buff, healing 1% of base health every second. Now, in most scenarios, I don't know how effective this is going to be, since it's going to force you to cross that threshold of 9 to 10 where your light energy buffs are going to expire after 6 seconds, meaning that you'll likely be forced to convert into dark energy, which will last 16 seconds. The only way I can see this not interfering with Mr. Negative's playstyle is if you reach 10 light energy when you're about to launch the L2, and then converted it to dark energy, chained a few heavies in the corner, and then activated your L2 without dashing back at all. So that'll let you keep that regeneration buff on you for quite a while and let you regen health throughout the entire process of heavy chaining, the L2, and any heavy chaining or hits you do afterwards without dashing back. If played right, I can see this synergy being really nice for Mr. Negative sustainability, since you're healing 1% of your base health per second. So a mere 10 seconds or a mere 12 seconds of having this up gives you the same effect as using an L3 with 9 light energy charges. This next synergy from light to dark isn't very impactful in my opinion. Mr. Negative isn't part of this synergy, so he gains no benefits, and even the champions that do gain benefits, who are Spider-Verse heroes, don't really gain that much. They gain the ability to apply either a weakness, an armor break, or a degen by using any of their special attacks twice throughout the entire fight. And none of these debuffs are particularly powerful, so I really don't see this synergy being that important whatsoever. These next two synergies are just your classic bonus crit rating and bonus damage synergies. There's really nothing else to say. They'll increase your damage and crit rate by a little bit, but other than that, they don't matter at all. To showcase the basics of how I like to use Mr. Negative in majority of fights that don't have much to them, I decided to take him against this Deadpool in Act 6 rather than Realm of Legends Winter Soldier, because Realm of Legends Winter Soldier plays really passively, and you're not going to find that AI in most endgame content. I got this idea from two really good friends of mine, Vega of MCOC and Campo MC, who both started using this Deadpool fight to showcase champions instead of Realm of Legends Winter Soldier, and I really like that idea. It's a good fight, because not only does the AI actually play more realistically, but the opponent can actually get their special 3, which means you need to worry about how much power you're giving them. And Deadpool's regen adds a little bit of an extra layer to that, in that you need to somehow kind of out-damage that, or find a way to block it out. Now, this Deadpool fight is pretty ideal for Mr. Negative, because his special 1 can be very easily heavy countered, which allows Mr. Negative to stack up a lot more Furies than you normally could, but I think it's a really good fight to showcase him on nonetheless. So going into this Deadpool fight, my plan is just to work my way up to the L1 with 9 light energy, so I can get that really strong bulwark passive, which will let me block most attacks and take 0 damage if I'm parrying. So what I do here is I'm intercepting him with the special attack, because I don't want to parry, because that would put me at 10 charges, and when I converted that, they would start to expire, and I don't want to have that timer on my dark charges just yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to heavy counter Deadpool for a bit, while I work my way up to my L2. And you can see, since his special 1 has such a short range, I can heavy counter right out of it. And because of that, I can farm a lot of Furies and a lot of light energy. So here I'm countering, getting him closer to his wall, and trying to land a parry, but I screwed up the timing, but here I hit it. I use a medium to get him a little bit closer, and then I heavy counter him twice, and drop the L2. Now, with how much damage these degens do, I should be able to get him really close to 0 damage. But even if I don't manage to kill him with this, I should be able to just heavy counter him a few times. And now you see his regen kicks in, but those petrifies are giving him minus 160% regen rate and getting rid of most of it, and actually reversing it to a pretty good extent. So here, I'm just going to heavy counter a few more times after activating that L1, because I want to have that bulwark passive so I take no more damage. And to finish it, little evade from my heavy mechanic, and a medium to end it all. So Mr. Negative did this fight pretty quickly, and if I remember right, it only took about 65 hits, which isn't bad at all. Now, for this Venom fight, I just wanted to show how much damage Mr. Negative's L2 can do when his attack is increased, and the best example of that is with the Power Shield node, because since the damage those degenerations do is based on your modified attack, having Power Shield means they're gonna do a ton more damage. So since this fight is fairly basic other than that Power Shield node, I'm going to go for my classic rotation of working my way to the L1 first so I can get my boar passive up. And that'll mean that I take very little, if any, block damage, which will allow me to keep the fight on with pretty much a full yellow bar. So I'm going to intercept with that so I don't have to parry again, and so I can actually keep my charges without having to worry about losing them. So trying to get him in the corner so I can land a heavy just for the fury, I can dash back and convert him. His L1 can't really be heavy countered, so I'm going to need to rely on parries a bit more in order to get him near his corner. So here I'm just playing the weighted game, working my way up to my L2, then I'm going to chain some furies and launch into it. So I should have all the charges I need now, but I might go for one more just to ensure I get as many degens as possible. Here I can heavy counter. At this point I'm just getting him to the wall and I see I only really have enough power for one heavy. So I drop it, and that's 19,500 damage per tick. And it's absolutely melting Venom. And he gets that done in 44 hits, which is insane. This is an Act 7 fight, and that was done in 44 hits. This fight is against the Elsa Bloodstone in 7.2.1 if I'm correct, and it's on the Foresight path. And the reason I wanted to showcase this fight is because since Mr. Negative's heavy intercept does count as an intercept for nodes like Foresight, Ebb and Flow Intercept, and many others I'm just forgetting in the moment, he's a really good option for this fight and for this entire path. And so what I'm able to do here is instead of having to follow that original playstyle of just parrying, heavying, and launching off my L2, or having to block it all, I can just play this entire fight without being touched by the opponent. And that makes him really powerful. So going into this, my plan isn't to really care about how much dark energy I can stack up or how many degens I can get from that L2. It's just about stacking up one or two light energy at a time and then going for a heavy intercept for that fury. Now, right off the bat, I made a little bit of a mistake in that I tried to intercept her light attack, which still works, but I don't get the fury from that, because remember, Foresight only works when you intercept the opponent's medium attack. So with that knowledge, I started playing the fight a little bit differently, in that I tried to hit Elsa once when she was recovering from the special, and then I would dash back, so as to ensure that in order to hit me, so I can evade counter her, she actually has to go for a medium attack instead of just a light attack. So here, I'm stacking up my dark energy, and I managed to drop my L2, and you see, even though I only dropped that with around 12 dark energy, my degens are still doing around 5,500 damage per tick, which is more than they would regularly do, even with 20 dark energy. And that's how much benefit Mr. Negative gains from being able to abuse the Foresight node. And you see now, Elsa Bloodstone's already down to 24%, and it really hasn't been that long at all. My combo meter is looking a bit weird and saying I only have 7 hits, but that's because of release valve, so my combo meter is going to be a little bit scuffed, but at the end, if I remember right, we should be able to see what the actual combo is. So here, I'm just going to finish off the fight by heavy intercepting a bit and killing her with that fury. And keep in mind, I'm finishing this fight with a full yellow bar, because the opponent, Elsa Bloodstone, hasn't touched me at all. And that makes him really good for this entire lane, because he's not going to lose much, if any, health at all. And I'm finishing that fight in only 57 hits, which is really good, considering that this is an Act 7 Chapter 2 fight. Those normally take just a little bit longer, especially with a Rank 2 champion. Now, this next fight I'm taking Mr. Negative for is against an Iron Patriot on an Oscillate Do Not Go Gentle Foresight path, and if I remember right, this is one of those paths in 7.1.5. And this path seems like it was almost built for Mr. Negative, because not only does he gain that Foresight Fury from doing his heavy intercept, but since the Do Not Go Gentle node removes 2 of those charges whenever you intercept the opponent, and Mr. Negative's heavy counts as an intercept, you're going to be able to remove 2 of those charges whenever you use that heavy intercept. Now this means you can either play using a lot of heavy intercepts throughout the fight to make sure your Do Not Go Gentle charges stay low and stay under control, or alternatively, you can just play however you want for majority of the fight, and then at the end, when you're close to killing the opponent, then you can just spam a bunch of heavy intercepts by heavy intercepting and then dexterying and then converting your dex into a light energy charge and then repeating the cycle. Now, right here, my only worry is that Iron Patriot might throw his special one while he's in this armor phase, because he normally plays so passive, and in general most fights and most champions will play very passive while in the armor phase of Oscillate, and that just means I personally get caught off guard really easily when a champion in the armor phase throws a special, and I'm very rarely prepared for it. But either way, we just threw off a massive special 2 onto Iron Patriot, and if I can see this right, we're dealing 9,400 damage per tick. And now we're at the end of the fight, and I have one of those Do Not Go Gentle charges on me. So I'm trying to get it off by going for a heavy intercept, and here's where I make a little bit of a mistake. I go for this heavy intercept on 44 hits, which means while I will be able to remove that Do Not Go Gentle charge, I'm also getting another, since my heavy intercept counts as a hit, and because of that, I'm going to take a little bit of damage when the fight ends. But nonetheless, Mr. Negative got this done in 46 hits, which again, is really impressive considering this is a rank 2 against a 7.1.5 fight. Next, I'm going to be bringing Mr. Negative onto this path in 7.2.3, and I like to think of this fight as Winter Soldier's Revenge, because it has some pretty gnarly nodes. It has Buffet, Heal Reversal, Safeguard, and Aspect of War. Now normally, this would be made even harder by the fact that Buffet is there, but since Mr. Negative is immune to all Nullify effects, we aren't going to need to worry about Buffet at all. But that could actually be a curse in disguise, since the Heal Reversal node means that we would have been reversing any of that Buffet healing that Winter Soldier may get. But nonetheless, Mr. Negative is going to be able to tackle this node all well and good. In this fight, because of the way Aspect of War works, I'm going to be trying to use this special one quite a lot, since with Aspect of War, the opponent only goes unblockable if you have 0 block proficiency, and even though Mr. Negative's native block proficiency will go down to 0 over the course of the 50 seconds, the block efficiency he gets from that Borg passive isn't counted. And so because that Borg passive technically elevates his block efficiency back over 0, he's going to be able to block Winter Soldier's attacks when other champions couldn't. Now, what you saw right there was me using my heavy intercept to end the Aspect of War unstoppable. And you can do that because one of the conditions on the Aspect of War node is if you intercept the opponent while they have that unstoppable on them, you get rid of it. And that makes Mr. Negative a really good option for this node, since you don't have to worry about timing your intercepts right, which for a lot of players may not be that big of a hassle, but when a champion has a native way to intercept that isn't just going for it, I do appreciate it, because it feels a lot safer than wildly going for intercepts when the timing may not be ideal. Now, we just dropped a special, and you can see those degens are doing a fair amount of damage at about 3,100 per tick. But keep in mind, this node doesn't have anything that's really going to be enhancing our damage. So, our damage is going to be fairly low for this fight, and it will be a fairly long fight. But Mr. Negative will be able to get this down really safely. And you see, with that bulwark passive I now have, I am able to block Winter Soldier's attacks. But I don't really want to, because I want to minimize the amount of block damage I take. Now right there, this is something really important I want to say. You saw that Winter Soldier didn't attack into my heavy charge, and so my heavy ran out, and I just ended up firing it off. Now that could have ended really badly if Winter Soldier wasn't in the right positioning, that he would get hit by my heavy. But luckily enough for me, he was in the right positioning, so I didn't get punished for that. And this is an instance of do as I say, not as I do, but try to make sure you go for that heavy charge when the opponent is being very aggressive and when they don't have a special. Because if you don't heavy charge while they're aggressive, if you heavy charge while they're playing really passive, or if you heavy charge while they have a special, there's a really good chance that you're just going to get retaliated into one way or another, and you're going to die. Because Mr. Negative has a pretty glass cannon-like health pool. While he does have that regen off the L3, and while he does have that bulwark passive to help his sustainability, he has a very glass cannon-like health pool at the base, and so you do not want to be taking any hits whatsoever, like with most champions. Now, we're getting near the end of this fight. I'm just trying to get some of my light energy converted to dark energy so I can end it with an L2, and I should be able to do that fairly soon now that I'm at 9 dark energy. I don't have a bulwark passive active, which means I won't be able to block any of Winter Soldier's attacks. So right now, I'm just trying to build up my light energy that I will convert into dark energy by dexing. And here, I'm about to convert, and there I go, and I should be able to finish this fight off with one bigger SP2. So we just got 3,100 to tick degens, and that should finish him off, and if not, this heavy intercept will. But the degens did the job. So this hit count is a bit higher than the others at 106, and I did lose a little bit of health, but with optimal play, you could probably take that fight down losing less than 10% health. And overall, while you could lose a bit of health on that fight, I also think Mr. Negative is a very safe option to take into it, and there's a lot less risk involved. I would rather lose 5 or 10% health than die altogether by messing up an intercept or by eating a combo, since Winter Soldier is unblockable. This next fight in 7.2.5 is a personal favorite of mine, because at first it seems really daunting, especially considering that Ultron just recently got buffed. But when you read through the nodes on this fight, you realize they're perfect for Mr. Negative. So we have buff synthesis, fury/precision, which Mr. Negative will really benefit from since he gains furies natively, but we also have Icarus, which Mr. Negative counters perfectly. We also have Matador, which can be a little bit of a pain, but it's easier to give the opponent a bar of power than it is to get a bar of power yourself. So overall, we should actually be getting specials more often than we regularly would. And you see, what we can do in this fight that lets Mr. Negative cheese it so much is we can just stack up a bunch of furies and then convert them just by dashing back. Now, if I had the awakened ability, I could trigger that degen on purpose in order to regenerate a bit, and I still could trigger it if I had 3 debuffs active on Ultron, but honestly, I don't feel the need to, especially with how easily I can just dash back and convert those furies. Now right here, I'm going to try to convert the light into dark energy and get a few furies from Icarus so that I can use to take more light energy and then launch off an SP2. And you'll see, even with only 18 dark energy, the 3 Icarus furies mean this is going to deal a lot of damage. It's doing about 7.4k per tick, which is really nice. And of course I had those 2 petrifies up on Ultron, which would help if he was at lower health, and I'm pretty sure they will help once he gets to that threshold where he regenerates. But for now, this just means that if I wanted to, I could trigger that Icarus degen, just to show how good Mr. Negative is at countering degen. Now, one thing that can be a little bit of a pain in this fight is Ultron's evade on a timer. Now, I still think it's actually easier than it was before, since before you didn't know when he was going to evade. You just knew that on your hits he had a chance to after a 6-second cooldown. But this still can be a little bit of a pain, and you see right there, if I didn't use my special right before that evade triggered, he could have evaded it, and that really wouldn't have been a good time. But he didn't, and that's all that matters. And you see, I'm dealing about 5,000, a little over 5,000 degen per tick, even though it's ended now. But the petrifies are reversing his healing. Here, I probably shouldn't have attacked in, that was a little bit risky, but it doesn't matter because I managed to get back out and use another SP2. And if I am correct, this should finish Ultron off, especially with the Petrify active. And the hit counter might seem slightly high at 101, but keep in mind, I was purposely throwing full combos so I could stack up as many Furies as possible for light energy. So in this fight, the combo meter might be a little bit inflated. But overall, I think Mr. Negative did a really good job, and if we looked at the amount of time that fight actually took, I reckon he cleared it a lot faster than many other options would. And not to mention, because of how easily Mr. Negative can keep those Furies on himself under control from the Icarus node, and even if he did trigger the degen, he could be 120% resistant to it, depending on the number of debuffs you have active on the opponent. I reckon he cleared that fight in a far safer manner to boot. This next fight is purely intended to show how effective Mr. Negative is against Mojo. And this is really relevant because Mojo ends up popping up a lot both in Alliance War on defense on some pretty hard nodes and even as the boss, but he also pops up quite often in endgame content. While I don't really compete at high tier Alliance War just yet, there is a really talented Mr. Negative player named MP Blaze who has some awesome videos taking down a lot of really hard fights in Alliance War with Mr. Negative. I'll be linking his video in the description, and I would highly encourage you to check out his channel if you want to see how good Mr. Negative can be in high tier Alliance War, and how good you can get with Mr. Negative, and how effective he can be once you master the champion. Anyways, to finally get into the fight, there aren't really many troublesome nodes in this fight. There's just Tyrant, and since Mr. Negative is a villain, he doesn't have to worry about the negative effects of that at all. Get it? Negative. Anyways, going into this fight, my plan is fairly simple. Mojo doesn't have any native nullify effects, other than that special one, and ideally I don't want to be taking any hits from the special one, but regardless, Mr. Negative would be fine, since he's immune to nullify effects. The only way Mojo is going to be triggering degenerations on me is by causing my buffs to end faster with his anti-life field. So because of this, I'm not going to be triggering any Furies throughout the fight, since Furies are my only buff that actually have a duration on them. When you Dexterity, that buff is the precision buff is paused until you attack into the opponent. So my plan here is I'm not scared of triggering Mojo's prompts, and I'm not scared of using Dexterity at all. I'm just making sure that whenever I do trigger Dexterity, I dash back afterwards so I can purify it before attacking into Mojo. And this means I'm not going to end any buffs, and so Mojo isn't going to put any degeneration effects on me. Now, even if he did, I'd probably be safe because of my degen resistance, depending on the number of debuffs I have on him, but still, better safe than sorry. And you see, I've already ended this fight in a matter of 56 hits. A single special 2 took him down without any Furies whatsoever. And the point of this is to show even in a really difficult matchup like against Mojo, you don't need to stack up a bunch of Furies and do a ton of damage with the L2. By simply playing the fight correctly and countering Mojo's mechanics, you're likely going to do enough damage to take him out anyways. This last fight might be my favorite purely because of how easily Mr. Negative tears through it. Now this is a Man-Thing boss in 7.2.4 if I remember correctly, and the nodes can be a little bit troublesome if you don't have a counter. High energy diet, power shield, flare, and power reversal. Now, I'm looking at this fight and I'm thinking Mr. Negative is going to chew this up and spit this out. Because while Mr. Negative has no way to shut down direct damage, he can only shut down degen damage, him being a science attacker and flare damage being affected by class relationships means even if this fight takes a long time, I'm not gonna die from that direct damage alone. Now, Man-Thing can be a hard fight in his own right, because when those pus buffs he puts on you end, he also applies poison and armor break debuffs, and especially with a stacked Man-Thing like this, those poisons can do a lot of damage. And while Mr. Negative may not be poison immune, as you just saw, I can just dash back to get rid of those pus buffs whenever they show up on me, and I won't even need to worry about that poison. Now, I'm gearing up to throw my L2, and I'm thinking this might take 1 or 2 to kill him, since it is a pretty stacked Man-Thing, but I was shocked at how easily this L2 melted him. We're seeing 37,000 degeneration damage per tick out of a rank 2 6-star, and we just tore that Man-Thing apart in a matter of 41 hits. This is an endgame boss, and Mr. Negative just ended it in 41 hits. If you've managed to make it through this video, thank you so much for sticking with me. I know it's been a long one, and at times I may have dragged on, or the fights or my ability explanations may have been uninteresting, but I really hoped you managed to learn something from this video, or at least gained a little bit more of an appreciation for how amazing of a champion Mr. Negative is. Now, this video was heavily inspired by some of the other deep dive guides I had seen in the past, such as the Mojo one from Spinnaker 3, and the Killmonger and Mr. Fantastic guides that DLL put out. I would highly encourage you guys to check out their channels in general, because they put out some amazing content, but if you're really interested in seeing more deep dives like this into champions that you may not always think of as a really good option, I would highly encourage you check out their videos. I mentioned earlier that MP Blaze has some really good high tier war videos with Mr. Negative, and again, I really would encourage you to check out his videos. He plays Mr. Negative so skillfully. So I will be linking DLL, Spinnaker 3, and of course MP Blaze's channels in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any fights or any paths you would love to see me take with Mr. Negative, please do not hesitate to let me know in the comments. Cheers y'all, bye.